Dear students, through Radio Khachi 90.4 FM, हम सब का रेडियो, this is Dr. Sameera Sinha, Assistant Professor, Jagannath Nagar College, Ranchi University. In our previous lecture on William Wordsworth's poem, Lines Written a Few Miles Above Tintern, Abbey, prescribed in Semester 4, English Honours Core Course, Paper 9, Unit 3, we learnt about William Wordsworth, his pantheistic philosophy, and analyzed the poem up to the first stanza. Tintern Abbey is a philosophical and autobiographical poem. Harold Bloom, in his book, The Visionary Company, calls it a history in little of Wordsworth's imagination. It is also an excellent example of Wordsworth's idea that poetry is emotions recollected in tranquility. The very first line of the poem tells us that he is revisiting a place and scenery that has made a deep impact on him. He looks forward to what the present visit will mean, not only to him, but also to his sister Dorothy, who is accompanying him. Let us start with the second stanza. In the second stanza of Tintern Abbey, Wordsworth reveals that the long absence has its creative compensations. It provides poetic inspiration and perception. The beauty of this scene remains permanent even during the poet's absence. Its memory has influenced him to acts of kindness and love and instilled in him a serene mood, bringing about a deep understanding of life. Wordsworth elaborates this by saying, in lines 27 to 30, and I quote, "In hours of weariness, sensations sweet, felt in the blood and felt along the heart, and passing even into my purer mind with tranquil restoration." F.R. Lewis, in his book Revaluations, affirms emotion and ecstasy in Wordsworth. His attitude is contemplative, and whenever he talks of mind, he thinks of man. As he writes in line 32 to 34, a good man's life, his little, nameless, unremembered acts of kindness and of love. His long absence creates that blessed mood, that serene and blessed mood, line 41. Until the breath of this corporeal frame and even the motion of our human blood, almost suspended, we are laid asleep in body and become a living soul. As he says this in lines 43 to 46. In his body, he is laid asleep and becomes a living soul. It is only then that with the power of tranquility and harmony, we see into the life of things, as he writes in line 49. This is, as we had discussed in our previous lecture, when we talked about how Wordsworth deals with different aspects of the relationship between man and nature. We spoke of mystery and vision. Perhaps this is what is expressed in this line. We see into the life of things. It is a vision extraordinaire. Wordsworth's insight into the mystery of nature is evident here. It is a mystical vision, which is also scientific in spirit. He writes of the moments of peace which are felt mid the din of town cities. It gives him the power of harmony and the deep power of joy that is both inspiration and ecstasy. This aspect is explained by C.M. Bowra in his book, where he writes that the Romantics were in search of an unseen world, the world of the spirit. The poet discloses instances when, oppressed by everyday concerns, he returns in spirit to the wooded banks of the Wye. As he writes in lines 56 to 57, O sylvan Wye, how often has my spirit turned to thee. There is an element of subjectivity, as we note here, a personal testimony, as the poet longs the harmony and quiet of the Wye. The river is, for him, not just a symbol, but almost life itself. Lines 58 to 111 is in a way an expose of the tripartite structure of the poet's growth. According to Danby, growth in Wordsworth is the capacity to respond to the active universe. The lines read like a Bildungsroman, that is, the novel of development. Roman means story. And here we have the story of the growth of the poet's soul. The poet enumerates the progress in his attitude to nature from boyhood to youth and to old age. He speaks of the glad animal movements of his boyish days preceded any awareness of nature. In this stage, one observes the dual aspects of fear and sensation. As he writes in lines 67 to 68, when like a roe I bounded o'er the mountains. Gradually a time comes when his perception of natural objects brings immediate joy, leading him onwards to experience simultaneously both vision and emotion. He writes in line 80, an appetite, a feeling, and a love. It was a time for aching joys and dizzy raptures, a time which is past now. The poet has entered into a third phase of his life, a mature phase. There are gifts of nature now to compensate for the loss of his spontaneous raptures and joy. At this stage, he looks on nature and hears in it the still sad music of humanity. Please look at line 91. The still sad music of humanity. To comprehend the three stages of the poet's development, it is vital to understand the dialectic of the senses. The young child has an organic sense of both sight and sound. The older youth, on the other hand, sees the emotion in it that the mature man cannot see again. But the mature man gains an intimation of immortality, of his renewed continuity with a young child, because he can hear the still sad music while he can simultaneously observe a sober color of nature. The progress continues from the physical to the spiritual. The music is still because it plays to the spirit and not to the sensual ear. In the stillness of the sound, the poet hears evidence not only of man's mortality, but also of man's inseparable bond with nature. While boyhood is a period of awe and sensations, youth is a period of senses and maturity, a period of imagination, meditation, and spirit. Wordsworth expresses these thoughts in lines 100 to 102, where he writes, "A motion and a spirit that impels all thinking things, all objects of all thought, and rolls through all things." In these lines, Wordsworth, in his meditative state, is able to see and hear a primal unity and manifestation in all objects. There is a parallel of this elevated state of mind in Samuel Taylor Coleridge's poem, The Aeolian Harp, where he writes, "Oh, the one life within us and abroad, which meets all motion and becomes its soul. A light in sound, a sound-like power in light, in all thought and joyance everywhere." It is this consecration or sacramental vision that becomes the main message of Wordsworth's song. Throughout the poem, the emphasis lies on nature as observed and later remembered, an emphasis on experience through the senses and not the invisible world. The poet views the relationship between the outer and the inner world, the outer and the inner world, and expresses it through a vocabulary of definiteness and fixities. Though the imagination dissolves and unifies the differences between the seen and the unseen. This is why Wordsworth, even though he loses the aching joys that is nature's gift, still loves nature and apprehends it through the senses of sight and sound. Nature now becomes his greatest teacher. He writes in lines 109 to 111, and I quote, "The anchor of my purest thought, the nurse, the guide, the guardian of my heart and soul, of all my moral being. Nature transforms into a nurse, a guide, a guardian of the heart and soul. As his love for nature matures into leading him to love other human beings, listening to the still sad music of humanity." The meditative state of the later years is a time of mature imagination, It brings forth visions of joy and links his heart's generosity towards fellow beings. This philosophical and supreme teaching of nature preserves Wordsworth's genial spirits from decay. From lines 111 to 159 in the fourth section of the poem moves logically from an account of Wordsworth's growth into maturity towards thoughts from boyhood about his sister Dorothy. The poet becomes uncertain of his responsiveness to the presence of beauty when natural decay sets in with advancing years. He therefore turns towards his sister Dorothy, who now represents his earlier self, as someone who can still feel the dizzy joys of natural communion that he can reflect upon and recollect only now. He addresses her directly as "my dear, dear friend" in line 116. He expects her to go through the same stages of tranquility that he has experienced, as he writes from line 116 to 121, and I quote, "And in thy voice I catch the language of my former heart, and read my former pleasures in the shooting lights of thy wild eyes. Oh, yet a little while may I behold in thee what I was once, my dear, dear sister." Wordsworth's second visit is Dorothy's first, and he concludes by hearing in her voice the language of my former heart. He hopes that in the future her memory will also turn into a dwelling place for all sweet sounds and harmonies, in line 141 to 142, as he expresses it. Wordsworth's insight into the future, as he writes, "Future time, when Dorothy too will return to this beloved landscape, foretells the healing power that memories have on her when he is no more." For he expresses it in these words, "If I should be where I no more can hear thy voice, nor catch from thy wild eyes these gleams of past existence." In lines 146 to 148. Wordsworth, the visionary and philosopher, is aware that his existence will persist in those eyes, that he will live on in her memory as a worshipper of nature. Through imagery and metaphor, Wordsworth gives abstract ideas concrete shape and makes the reader apprehend the truth as he sees it. Harold Bloom beautifully sums it up by observing that the poem is a consoling story of a natural growth that tests the soul, teaches it generosity, and accepts its love. Thank you.